Okay, welcome to tonight's live. We are going to be discussing Unit 1 and 2 to review for your final exam. Let me just adjust this light real quick. Okay, welcome to tonight's live. We are going to be reviewing Unit 1 and 2 to review for your final exam. So drop a comment in the chat to let me know when you are here. And I'm not going to go in the exact order of, there we go. I'm not going to go in the exact order of your review for your final, but I did look through and make sure that I have all the concepts. So if you get the information from these videos, you'll be good to go with that review. Hi, Rami. Good to see you tonight. Welcome, welcome. We got Dominique. You have a question about the project. All right, Dominique, go ahead. While we're waiting for people to hop on here, you can go ahead and ask me some questions about the project. Go for it. It is due Friday, remember, and it is worth a lot of points. So you definitely want to do it. So go ahead, Dominique, and type away with your question while we get some more people on here. Like I said, I'm going to be covering Units 1 and 2 tonight for the final review. Hey, Peter, how's it going? Good to see you. So what you want to do is take some notes while we're discussing Unit 1 and 2. Dominique, there are some topics that are in more than one continent. Which one would you put the topic in? So I would say put it in the one that it fits with best. If you want to put it in both, that's fine. You don't necessarily have to put the annotation in both. As long as you have it on there once, that's fine. There's several topics that are in the Middle East. There's no line for the Middle East. So either put it on Europe, Africa, or China and India. Any of those will work. All right. We're not going to be as picky about that. As long as you put in your annotations where it happened and a little bit of information about it, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started because we got a lot of information to cover. The first thing, sure, Dominique, no problem. The first thing that we're going to talk about is a little bit of context for Unit 1. So everything that's leading up to 1200. Unit 1 starts in 1200. So let's talk a little bit before that, all right? And you should know some of these concepts already because your timeline covered some of those things too. So the first thing, of course, first major thing that we want to remember is the Neolithic Revolution. That's basically the switch from hunting and gathering to farming and domestication of animals. That's when people start to settle down more and we start to see civilizations rise up. So these civilizations rise up. Then these civilizations will lead to empires. That starts in 600 BCE and it goes to around 600 CE. These empires include Persia, Greece, Rome, Byzantine, Mauryan, Gupta, the Han Dynasty, and also the Mayan Empire. All right, those are all different ones. Hey, girl, how's it going? Good to see you. What we're doing basically is we're just talking about Unit 1 and 2 tonight. Right now I'm covering before Unit 1, so this would be all before 1200. And this is pretty much matches up perfectly with your study guide. Okay, we have trade routes during this time frame. Silk Road, and remember that's an overland trade route. And that connects China with the Mediterranean as well as Europe. And then we have the maritime trade route, which is in the Mediterranean Sea at this time. Spread of Buddhism is happening. Spread of Buddhism is important. The reason why it is so appealing to people is because it rejects the caste system. Remember, Hinduism supports the caste system. Buddhism says no to the caste system. And so people really like it. And the way it's spreading is through missionaries and merchants along the Silk Road. So make sure that you remember that part as well. Also, in China, we have the Mandate of Heaven. Remember, we talked about the Mandate of Heaven, and basically that means that if the emperor has the Mandate of Heaven, that means he has the favor of the gods. If something bad happens, then people would say, oh, that emperor has lost the Mandate of Heaven and he should not rule anymore. And that's usually when that dynasty would get overthrown and a new dynasty would come about. If he has really good things and he's doing good things for the people and the people are all happy, then apparently he has the Mandate of Heaven. All right. Also, during and I'm not sure. I don't want to pronounce it wrong, so I'm going to defer this to my resident Chinese speaker. But during this dynasty, I think it's Yao, if I'm correct. During this dynasty is when Confucianism starts. All right, so make sure that you remember that. And Confucianism focuses on education and relationships. Remember, we were talking about how the father is over the son, and the son respects the father, and the emperor is over the people, and the people respect the emperor. That's all about relationships. So that's where this comes in, filial piety. This basically means respecting your ancestors and your duty to your ancestors to respect them. All right. Also, under the Han Dynasty, the Confucian ideas continue. This is when we see civil service exams. Those were the tests that you would take in order to be able to be a civil servant or to be in government. And after that, we have the Sui Dynasty, and this is when the Grand Canal is built. Grand Canal is important because it connects agriculture between the north and the south in China. After that, we have the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty, they learned to grow a faster version of rice. It's called champa rice. And it's a variety that grows faster so that they can provide more food for the people. Basically, more harvest throughout the year. They also expand the Chinese government during this time. They revitalized the Silk Road, and they developed the tribute system. The tribute system is where different outside people are paying China taxes. We looked at that image of the Chinese general who was getting tribute from the nomads. I think it was the Zheng nomads, and they were bowing down to the general and giving him tribute. That's an example of this tribute system. Hi, Mr. Monkey. Nice to see you. Okay, so then we have Japan. Let's talk about Japan now. Japan during this time has a decentralized government. Ooh, sorry, my camera keeps going unfocused. So it's basically run by clans that are headed up by land-owning nobles. Decentralized just means that the government is all over the place and kind of run by the clans. Ah, very good. Yes, kowtow. Except you didn't spell it right, but close. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so this is when they have the shogun. Remember, he's at the top. So I'm going to show you up here. Japan has the shogun. Under that is the daimyo. And they are like the landlords. And then we have the samurai. The samurai are the knights, basically the warriors. And under them would be the peasants. And also write down that Shinto is their official religion. Shinto is basically veneration of ancestors as well as nature and spirits. Eventually, missionaries are going to bring Buddhism in, and that will mix with Shinto and kind of synchronize. Yes, Rami, this is all before 1200. So this is before Unit 1. You would use this as context information. Some of your questions on your final may refer to some of this time period. So that's why we're going over it real quick. Okay, so that's Japan. Let's talk real quick about Persia. Everybody saw Persia on the timeline. They're like, what's Persia? Basically, what you need to know about Persia is that it has a centralized government, and it's a pretty big empire, but it's united. All right. We also have Greece. Remember, Greece is divided into city-states. We have two important city-states, Athens and Sparta. Athens, remember, is a democracy. Sparta is more militaristic, run through the military. Then we have Rome. Remember, Rome starts as a monarchy, and it's basically going to end as an empire. Also, Christianity starts during Rome's time frame. We also have when Rome is divided in 395, they're divided into Western Rome and the Byzantine Empire. This is going to become important later because even though they're all Roman Catholic, the Byzantine Empire Catholics are going to start to think differently, have different doctrines. Remember, eventually they're going to split in the Great Schism and become Orthodox. These guys will stay Roman Catholic. And the split is called the Great Schism. And I think you have that on your timeline. So this is when these two split. Also, keep in mind that Western Rome declines. Byzantine Empire does really well. The reason is because of its connection to trade. The Byzantine Empire sits right in the middle of the major trade routes. So they are thriving, whereas Western Rome does not thrive. And eventually Western Rome will fall. That puts the Europeans into more of a decentralized government where feudalism takes over. Yes, this is Sparta. Yes. Okay, so the fall of Rome, remember this date? Fall of Rome is 476 CE. Just keep saying it over and over to yourself. Fall of Rome, 476 CE. That's when it ends. Some of the reasons: invasions by barbarians, economic problems from taxation, big gap between rich and poor, definitely some political problems, some spread of disease, a lot of stuff going on. As a result, Europe is going to fragment, and then we see feudalism develop. Also, in 1095 is the Holy Crusades. I had some kids asking me about the Holy Crusades today. There are several crusades. However, the one that I want you to really remember is the reason why it happens and how it starts. And basically, it's because the Muslims control Jerusalem, which is holy land for the Christians, and the Christians can't go there and worship and see the holy sites. And so the Pope says, hey, we're going to go and get that land back. And he tells people, all of your sins will be forgiven if you go and kill Muslims. And the knights are like, hey, this is a pretty good deal. We can go out and sin as much as we want, go kill a couple of Muslims, get the Holy Land back, and our sins will be forgiven. That's the gist of the Holy Crusades. And it goes back and forth. Sometimes the Muslims win, sometimes the Christians win. Okay, yeah, it was Constantinople that's going to change. I think, though, that Rome's capital did change a couple of times, but that's like real intense. We don't need to remember that for right now. Okay, so spread of Islam, that's another thing that happens before 1200. Spread of Islam, this happens on the Indian Ocean trade route as well as the Trans-Saharan trade route. Another important thing about Islam that you need to remember is that when Muhammad dies, there is a split between the Sunni and the Shias because they cannot decide who their leader should be. Also, remember this term, Dar al Islam. This is basically the world of Islam as the empire spreads and expands. During the Abbasid Caliphate as well as the Umayyad Caliphate, the whole world of Islam, basically that empire will be called Dar al Islam. You will probably see that on your final exam. And then what's going on in Africa? Well, in Africa, we have several self-governing chiefdoms, so it's very decentralized as well. The important thing to remember about Africa is the Bantu migration. This is when they spread their language, their farming techniques, and their knowledge of how to use iron. And then in Southeast Asia, what is going on is the Indian Ocean trade route. Remember that they use the monsoon winds on this trade route to travel faster and to be able to get their goods there without spoiling. Also, Indian Ocean trade route is mostly used for things that are too heavy to transport on land. Okay, so that's all before 1200. Now I want to tell you what the world looks like in 1200 right before we go to our Unit 1. So here's what the world looks like around 1200. Africa, Europe, and Asia are all connected through trade. So we have a lot of cross-cultural interactions, all right? That basically means all these cultures are interacting. We also have a stable Byzantine Empire and various Islamic empires. We have a lot of learning and innovation going on in China, as well as Dar al Islam. All right, a lot of different new techniques and science and math all coming about in China and Dar al Islam. Western Europe and Japan still decentralized, and they are pretty much run by monarchs or shogun and land-owning nobles. And then Afro-Eurasia and America, remember that they develop in isolation of each other. So at this time, at 1200, they don't know about each other. They're not connecting yet. And so the Americas develop completely differently than Afro-Eurasia. One key factor is that the Americas do not have domesticated animals. And so they don't have that technology to be able to farm quicker. They don't use plows because they don't have any beast of burden to farm with. Okay, between 1200 and 1450 is this revival of large empires. Specifically, we have the Song Dynasty. We have the Aztec Empire in the Americas. Baghdad and Spain are like coming into this, and this emphasis of like learning and the Islamic world like being involved in that. And we have a lot of trade going on in West Africa, specifically Ghana and Mali. So that's where our world is when we're going into Unit 1. Unit 1 is from 1200 to 1450. For context purposes, it would be a good idea to remember these dates. 1200 to 1450, it's Unit 1. So we're going to start out Unit 1 by talking about the Mongols. Yes, Genghis Khan. You guys should remember a lot about him because we talked a lot about him when we were doing the Mongols. Basically, he's going to lead his empire from 1206 to 1368. Some things that you need to know about his empire: women had more rights in his empire. Remember that they could ride horses, they could shoot bow and arrow, they could hunt. They did a lot of the things that the men did. He also is going to conquer Baghdad, China, and Russia. He didn't get into Europe any further than that, though. Be able to identify his empire. Basically, it stretches all the way across Asia and into the Middle East. It's very large. How did he do this? Well, he used siege weapons, catapults, and attack walls. He starts attacking in 1209. And he did have some setbacks. Remember the Mamluks? They were able to overcome. And he was defeated in Japan by the weather. Remember that tsunami wiped them out? But once he builds his empire, key term is Pax Mongolica. This means very peaceful time in the area, especially the Silk Road. This was a result of him posting soldiers along the Silk Road to make it peaceful. Okay, now, after Genghis Khan dies, his empire continues through his grandsons and sons. So let's talk about China real quick. China would be the Yuan Dynasty, and that's spelled like this. And it is headed by his grandson, Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan does a couple of things when he comes into power. He gets rid of the tribute system that the nomads were having to pay tribute. And he does that because they're nomads as well. The Mongols are. So why would they make other nomads pay tribute? He also builds infrastructure like bridges and roads. And he protects farmland for the Mongol herd, or from the Mongol herd. So he really respects Chinese farmers, and he doesn't let the Mongol herds come in and take over. He's religiously tolerant. The Chinese upper class didn't really like him very much, though, because they weren't allowed to continue in their positions. And another key thing about China is that the Mongols do not assimilate into the culture. During the time that Kublai Khan was in power was when Marco Polo came to visit. And Marco Polo was accepted into Kublai Khan's court. He writes a lot about what was going on at that time and how things were governed. So we know a lot about how things were taking place in the Yuan dynasty because of Marco Polo. Okay, then we have the Mongols in Persia. And they're basically going to come in and end the Abbasid Caliphate. Remember, in China, they protected the farmland. In Persia, they don't do that. So that's a big problem because Persia has the aqueduct irrigation systems, the tunnels that run through their farmland. And what happened was the Mongol herds came in, and because of their stomping and their hooves, they destroyed that irrigation system. Unlike in China, though, they do allow Persians to continue running the government. And interestingly enough, they will eventually convert to Islam. Some Mongols do take up farming. However, in China, they kept their nomadic lifestyle. So that was one difference. And in Persia, the Mongols do assimilate into the culture. And then one last place that we're going to talk about is Russia. Remember, before the Mongols came, Russia was several city-states. It was very decentralized, run by princes. So when the Mongols came in, they took over Moscow and made it their home base. And they forced the Russian prince to collect tribute from the people. This is going to put a very heavy tax burden on the people. The Mongols also did not assimilate here in Russia because there was really nothing in Russia that they wanted. Nothing that, like, they said, oh, we got to settle down here. So they moved to around the Black Sea area, and they allowed the Russian princes to collect the tribute for them. Eventually, the Russian princes are going to take over and kick the Mongols out. But what they do learn from the Mongols is how to centralize their government. So, some long-term impacts about the Mongols. First, they create the largest empire in history. That's pretty cool. They revitalize trade through Pax Mongolica, and they make the Silk Road way safer. They improve interregional exchange. So this is going to allow Islam and China to kind of like coordinate the things that they've been creating and the ideas that they've been learning, and it will help each of the cultures and civilizations create even more and learn more. Paper will make its way from China to Europe during this time, which will allow for the Gutenberg press later. The bubonic plague, remember, that comes from the Mongols, so that's a lasting impact. Kills a lot of people and eventually causes feudalism to die out. Let's see. They also had awesome military strategies. Their army was really, really good at what they did. And so it changed the way that Europeans fought, because prior to this, Europeans had really clunky armor. And it changed that because they couldn't wear a knight's armor and fight against the Mongols. It just wasn't possible. Also, because of the siege strategies that the Mongols used, walled cities were no longer useful. You're right, Mr. Monkey. They did have a ruthless army, and the Black Death did kill 2/3 of Europe. All right, anybody having real quick questions about the Mongols before we go on to trade routes? I think you guys are all busy taking notes, which is good because we don't have as many comments as we usually do, which absolutely fine. I want you guys to take notes, so not a problem. Okay, so let's go on to the trade routes. Now, a little contextualization. Why did trade routes happen? Well, remember, the Crusades happened in 1095, and when the Crusaders come back to Europe, they have all these products that they didn't have before. And Europeans are like, wow, this is really nice. I'd really like to have this. And so that kind of influences the need to start branching out of their little areas and going on to trade. Also, China really wants gold and silver, and Europe has gold and silver. Europe really wants silk and tea, and China has silk and tea. So why not trade? So the first trade route we're going to talk about is the Silk Road. We had a really awesome day on the Silk Road, so you should know a lot about this one. But some key points here is the camel saddle makes the Silk Road possible because camels are required to travel through the desert. And so that is one of the big new technology that kind of makes it possible. Also, the magnetic compass spreads as a result of this. And let's see, cities develop along the Silk Road. Remember we talked about the caravanserai. I can't even hardly say it. Caravanserai. I think that's how you spell it. Yes. And basically, this is a name for cities that pop up along the Silk Road that will allow people to stop and rest and trade. And it's kind of like pit stops on the Silk Road. One of the very famous one is the Merc It Land. I think that's how you spell it. Yes, Merc and, sorry. No L right here. All right. Also, as a result of this, we have what's called flying cash. And basically what that was is a merchant could deposit money at one location and they could withdraw it at another location. Kind of like an early version of a bank. And it'll eventually lead to banking houses. On the Silk Road, merchants specialized in luxury goods. So that's another key point. Okay, I think I got everything for that. Indian Ocean trade route, let's go to that one. Indian Ocean trade route is going to cause cities in Western India to thrive because obviously they're the ones that are connected closely with the trade route. They're closest to Africa. Monsoon winds are very important. We already mentioned that. Fabric, spices, and slaves are traded on the Indian Ocean trade route. Also, the advances in technology are really helpful to make this happen. We have the lateen sail. And what was the other one? Oh, the astrolabe. Astrolabe makes it possible to navigate. Islam is also going to spread when the African merchants come to India. They will share their religion with the Indians. Once again, they exchange things here that are too heavy on land. And then another explorer that we talked about, make sure you have his name down. Remember, he takes voyages for the Ming Dynasty. And basically, it's to try to open new markets to China and also to show how awesome China is. Some Chinese were very critical of him because they didn't like outsiders. According to Confucian ideology, I can't talk. It's been a very long day. According to Confucian ideology, it was thought that they should lead an agrarian life and not venture outside, okay? But that's exactly what Zheng He was doing. He was kind of collecting information, and so there were a lot of critics to his voyages. This is when we're going to see the really big Chinese ships. All right. Next one we have is the Trans-Saharan trade route. This one is in Northern Africa. Just remember that the Sahara Desert is in Africa, so that will help you remember it. This causes new kingdoms to rise up. Remember we talk about Mali and Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa is the richest dude in the world, and he basically gets rich from the Trans-Saharan trade route. On the Trans-Saharan trade route, they trade salt, gold, and slaves. And once again, camel saddles make this possible, and Islam spreads. So we have some effects from these trade routes. Cross-cultural interaction increases. You should definitely know that word by now. You're going to be saying that in your sleep. Demand for labor also increases because the demand for products goes up. And we also see some large-scale public projects like irrigation and building more military defenses and just buildings in general. Okay, so those are your trade routes. Now we're going to talk about what's going on at this time in the different parts of the world. So at this time in China, we had the Song Dynasty. They become leading manufacturers of iron, steel, silk, porcelain, all of those things they're manufacturing. Okay. We also have Neo-Confucianism. And this is a blend or a synchronizing of Confucian, Buddhist, and Taoist all together. And it becomes very popular during this time frame. Also, we have paper money from China and the compass spreading to other parts of the world. So this idea of having paper money is kind of becoming known a little bit more. Yep, legalism is also taking place. It's kind of like going against Confucian. But I think that might be a little bit earlier. I think that's more of like Han Dynasty. I have to check that out. Okay. Also in China, woodblock printing. That's going on, as well as foot binding. Foot binding is where they bind women's feet so that they can't grow, and it literally breaks the foot and makes it really small. If you've seen Mulan, you have seen the grandma, how she walks with a cane. That's because her feet had been bound when she was little. And basically, it was thought to be more beautiful if women had smaller feet, but it was kind of a way to keep them bound to the house because it was really painful and they couldn't go outside of the house in order to work if they had their feet bound because of the pain. And so eventually it's going to be banned in 1912, but it comes about during the Song Dynasty. They're also going to use the tribute system during this dynasty. Okay. Then we have Japan. Japan is still decentralized during this time, and they have feudalism. We talked about how the shogun, the daimyos, I think it's daimyo, and then we have the samurai. That's feudalism, and it compares to European feudalism. They're both kind of based on this loyalty code, right? And we will talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But remember that the samurai are bound by what's called the Bushido Code. Bushido Code is basically their code of loyalty that they had to follow. It was similar to the code of chivalry for knights. So we're going to put this code of chivalry. That would be in Europe. So if you need to compare the two, this is a really good comparison. Okay. Also remember, in feudalism, there's very little social mobility. You're basically born into where you're going to stay. All right. Then we have Dar al Islam. In that time frame, we have the Abbasid Caliphate. Caliphate just basically means ruler. We also have the Umayyad. And we also talked about the Abbasid a little bit. So I'm just going to put the Umayyad up there. Basically, this is when their rule spreads to Spain, and they have religious toleration in Spain. They're also going to influence architecture. Remember, we had that picture of the arches, and it was striped. Let me draw it. I was going to print out a picture, and I forgot, but I think you have one on your study guide. But basically, it's something like this, and they had like red and white stripes. That was influenced by the Islams. The Islams, I'm sorry. Oh, it's been a really long day. By the Muslims. All right, we're not at World War II yet, Mr. Monkey. Quit trying to confuse them. Okay. So also at this time, we have the world's largest library in Cordoba, Spain. We talked about Ibn Battuta. He is the Islamic traveler. He travels throughout Dar al Islam and keeps a journal. So you may see some of that on the final exam. And the 5 pillars of Islam. Number 1, faith. 2, prayer. 3, I forgot 3. Charity. Give to charity. 4, fast. And 5, you have to take a Hajj, which is a journey to Mecca. I'm not sure if those are in the right order, but there's your 5 pillars of Islam. Yes, the Hajj is a pilgrimage to Mecca. Okay, let's go on to India. India, we have the Delhi Sultanate. I'll spell that for you. Delhi Sultanate, okay? This is where Islam and Hindu kind of have an interaction in northern India, and it's not very good. They don't get along. They have a lot of beliefs that they don't agree with, and the Sultanate will impose taxes on the non-Muslims. It's called, let me spell it right here. There you go. So this will be the tax on non-Muslims. Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Okay, Rami, nice to know. I'm glad the order doesn't matter because I don't think I had them in any specific order. So I appreciate it. Okay, so Delhi Sultanate, they put this tax on non-Muslims, and then we have this conflict between Muslims and Hindus. Here's the reason. Hindus pray to many gods. Muslims pray to one. Hindu temples show images. Muslims, no images. Hindus support the caste system. Muslims do not support the caste system because they're more about equality. That's why a lot of Hindus were more willing to go to Islam because they wanted equality, especially if they were in the lower caste. And last but not least, Hindus have several sacred texts where the Muslims only have one. So all of these differences causes strife and conflict. Then we have the Kadhi, or something like that. I really need to work on my pronunciations. But, you know, after a long day, if I get it spelled for you, then I think that's sufficient. All right, so basically what they did is instead of saying that they needed to study the sacred text, they focused more on forming a strong bond with the deities. And this is a little bit more appealing than just regular Hinduism because it appeals to women and especially those in the lower positions. It doesn't discriminate against them, and it helps spread Hinduism. So this was kind of like their response to the fact that people were converting to Islam. Buddhism will also start in India, and it spreads through the trade routes. And one vocab word that you have that you should remember is spelled like this. And basically, this is in Indian religions, and it means that it's basically like this ideal that a universal ruler will rule all the ethnic groups in a benevolent way over the entire world. So, practical terms, this is often imagined as like the Indian subcontinent kind of ruling in that area. I guess I'm not really explaining it very well, but basically like the Indian subcontinent region world, like, and so the ideal was that it would be a benevolent ruler, and it's supported in the Asian religions. So you may see this word again. All right, now we have Southeast Asia. We have a couple of different kingdoms. The ones that are sea-based, obviously that would mean that they are close to the sea or the ocean. We have this one. I want to make sure and spell it right. And this one is known for its strong navy. And this one is known for controlling the sea routes, and it is also a Buddhist kingdom. All right, I'm going to erase them, so if you don't have them written down yet, just hit pause real quick and rewind. Then we have some land-based kingdoms. And this one is the Center for Buddhist Studies. And this one is known by two names. They have a complex irrigation system and drainage system, which enables them to lead economically because they can grow more crops. And due to their irrigation system, they can harvest several times a year. Also, Islam is going to move to these kingdoms through merchants, as well as the sea-based ones. All right, let's move to the Americas, because even though the Europeans didn't know about the Americas yet, they still exist. So we have the Mississippian culture, and there we have the Cahokian people. Oh, there we go. I cannot talk tonight. The Cahokian people are the mound builders, and they have a matrilineal society, which basically means that your social standing is based on the woman's side of the family instead of the men's side of the family. And the women farmed, men hunted. We also have the Mayans. The Mayans legitimize their power through religion. Remember, that's an important word. And they basically use humans to sacrifice to the gods. They are also pretty good at science and astronomy, the concept of zero, and they invented chocolate. I really like the Mayans. Chocolate's my fave. Although I shouldn't eat so much of it. Anyway, Aztecs. Aztecs are our next people there in the Americas. Aztecs are known for the pyramids they built. They are also known for human sacrifices. In fact, they are hated by their enemies because of human sacrifices. Basically, if you're a prisoner of war, you could end up a human sacrifice. Let's see. Women are important in the Aztec community because they make cloth, and cloth was used to pay tribute to the nobles. So it's very important. Sometimes men had more than one wife as a result of this so that he could pay more tribute. Yes, Rami, all of this is the review sheet. I did not go in order of the review sheet, but all of it is on there. So if you take notes from this video and tomorrow's video, you don't even have to do the review sheet because it's all on there. All right. Their decline. So basically, they expand too much, and many tribes will resent them because of being forced to pay tribute. And when the Spanish come, these resentful tribes team up with the Spanish, as well as diseases start killing off the Native Americans. And so it's very easy for the Spanish to defeat them. Okay, and then the last tribe that we're going to talk about is the Inca. And they use a system spelled like this. And basically, it is a mandatory public service system where every male from the age of 15 to 50 works for public service works at some time. They provide labor. They also believed in royal ancestor veneration, which meant that they mummified their rulers, and the rulers continue to rule after death. And they also believe in animism, which means that some parts of nature and the physical world actually have supernatural powers. There are some African cultures at this time frame too that also practice that. They will eventually be defeated by Pizarro, who is an explorer and comes in. If you watched Germs, Guns, and Steel episode, you saw that happening. Yes, Unit 1 and 2. That's what we're doing tonight. And we'll be doing 3 and 4 tomorrow. And we're almost done. Let's see. Yes, we're almost done with Unit 1 and 2. I'm excited because I'm tired and I want to go chill. But I'm proud of you guys for hanging in there because you're going to be ready for this final. Okay, so Africa. Let's go to Africa. We have kin-based networks in Africa that are run by chiefs. Kin-based just means that they're family-oriented. We also have the TransSaharan trade route, which we already talked about, and how it spreads Islam. And the new kingdoms rising up. Once again, we have Mali and Mansa Musa. Remember, Mansa Musa goes on a Hajj or a pilgrimage, and he's basically going like this the whole time, just putting out his money. We also have Ghana. Ghana sells gold and ivory. They have a centralized government. During this time, we also have Zimbabwe. They basically have a lot of gold. Swahili develops here, which is a mixture between Bantu and Arabic or Arabic. And they had a capital city in Zimbabwe that's surrounded by a great wall. At its peak, 20,000 people lived in this city, which was really awesome. But unfortunately, overgrazing leads to the destruction of the city. And eventually, by the 1400s, people have left. We also have Ethiopia. This one is a Christian area. They prosper mostly because of trade. Once again, they have great architecture. They have great architecture, and there are an island basically of Christianity around all these Muslim countries. So we have, for the social structures of sub-Saharan Africa, the men dominate specialized skill. Women lead in agriculture and food gathering. We also have slavery going on, which would be prisoners of war, debtors, criminals. And slaves mostly work in homes and in agriculture. Okay, and then last but not least, we have one more word that you need to remember comes from the Africa continent, and it is griot. Griot is a storyteller, and the griot is basically in charge of passing on the culture to the next generations. So it's basically a form of verbal storytelling to pass on that culture. Okay, let's talk about Europe real quick. In Europe, we have feudalism. At the top, we have the monarch or the king, and then we have the nobles, and then we have the knights and the serfs at the bottom. Remember, serfs are not slaves. However, they are tied to the land, so they have to have the noble or the lord's permission before they leave the area. And knights are bound by that code of chivalry or honor and loyalty to whoever they've sworn allegiance to, just like the Japanese samurai. So feudalism is the political system, but we also have the economic system of manorial system. This one is economic and basically means that the manor where you lived was a self-sufficient area. Basically, you did not have to leave the manor to get anything that you needed. Now, it was very limited what you could get. It was all homemade and cottage industries, but you could survive just by staying on the manor. And once again, serfs are tied to the land. They need permission to leave. They also use a 3-field rotation system. And that means they basically are going to rotate where they grow the crops so that the ground doesn't become overused. Another important thing that happens in Europe is the signing of the Magna Carta. This happens in 1215, and this limits the king's power. It's the first time that the king's power was ever limited. So it kind of is important to remember that, because that's eventually going to lead to the challenging of monarchs. Okay, also during this time in Europe, we had the 100 Years' War. That's where England and France go at it. And England did well, but they weren't able to contain or to retain all the land that they wanted from France. At that time, what's significant about that is that people start to identify themselves with the king that they served. And so they start looking at themselves as French, or they start looking at themselves as English. Also, this war will spread gunpowder and the use of it. Another thing that we see happening in Europe during this time is anti-Semitism, which is the hatred or the dislike of the Jews. We see several Jews not having very many rights, and they're looked at as untrustworthy. Remember, they were blamed for the Black Death in some spots, and many are expelled from Western Europe, and they go to Central Europe. I'm sorry, they go to Eastern Europe. They're expelled from Western and Central Europe, and they go to Eastern Europe. Women during this time, they also had very few rights. Some were allowed to join religious orders, and some even became artisans, but they didn't have very many rights. Now, if you're talking about Islamic women, though, they were a little bit more equal. All right, then we talked about the Black Death. That happens in 1347. This ends feudalism because so many serfs die. Now they can demand more money. Also, during this time, we have the Renaissance. This is a period of artistic revival. We see all the Renaissance painters like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. And the printing press also makes manuscripts cheaper. Remember, our printing press is called the Gutenberg printing press. Also, we have Kiev Rus. Kiev Rus will later become Russia. The importance here that you need to know is that, remember, the prince that turns Orthodox Christian, and Kiev Rus becomes Orthodox Christian like the Byzantine Empire. Man, I am sorry, I'm stuttering tonight. All right, so let's look at a comparison of this time period. This is super important for SAQ that you need to write on Friday. So comparison, we have a lot of state building going on during this period. New empires are emerging with centralized governments. For example, we have the Song Dynasty. We have Abbasid fragmenting and starting new states to arise out of that. We have the Delhi Sultanate. We have Mali and Ghana, Aztecs and Incas, Europe centralized states emerging, and as feudal ties decline. Religion is also going to play an important part during this time because as far as like state building goes, basically it will make state building possible. So example of that is China, Confucianism and the civil service exams. That pretty much makes civil service exams okay and acceptable. We also have Europe, and the Roman Catholic Church is super powerful at this time. the Pope is almost in some spots and in some time periods more powerful than the king. We also have missionaries spreading religion, a lot of diffusion of religions, and the influence of Buddhism in China comes from India via the merchants. It fuses with Taoist beliefs and synchronizes with that into different versions of Buddhism. Buddhist writers influence Chinese literature, as well as it's adopted in Japan and Korea. Trade will also increase state building and cause more cross-cultural interaction. Also, the religion really has an effect on the Holy Land. Remember, we have 3 religions that want the Holy Land or are drawn to that area. And they're all drawn to that area because of holy sites. Christianity, because of Jesus being crucified there and born there and buried there. And Muslims and Islam because of the Dome of the Rock and Muhammad, and Jewish because of the temple. And so they all want that area. That's going to cause a lot of conflict. Okay, and then last but not least, well, actually, I think that's it. So if you don't have any questions, we are going to start with Unit 3 and 4 tomorrow at 7 p.m. Unit 3 and 4 are super important for your final and for the SAQ because that is going to be what your final is mostly over, as well as your SAQ. Not that this stuff isn't important because it's kind of like the basics and the foundation for everything that we're going to do. So tune in tomorrow, 7 p.m. for Unit 3 and 4. Anyone have any last minute questions before I hop off here? Okay, and then also don't forget Saturday tutorials, 9 to 12, if you still need some help with any of your assignments, especially if you have late work and you need some help with that. All right, have a great night, and I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.